Welcome to Lifting Your Spirit, a monthly broadcast in which we interview people about their spiritual lives and their thoughts on supporting others in lifting their spirits. I'm Reverend Joel Grossman, interfaith minister, director of spiritual services for Constellation Hospice here in Newburyport, and a spiritual coach on a donation basis.
And I'm Ted Jones, a meditation teacher at North Shore Insight Meditation Center.
Our show is based on the following four principles. One, everyone is spiritual. Sometimes we are conscious and active in our spiritual lives, sometimes not, but we're always spiritual.
And second, that there are many ways to lift your spirit, not only through religious practices, but also through nature, human relationships, service to others, just to mention a few.
Three, each person's spiritual path is unique and can vary over time.
And fourth, it's important to respect your own spiritual journey, to believe that one step leads to another, and also to respect the spiritual journey of other people, even if it may be very different from your own. We're not here to convince you of the benefits of any particular practice, but rather to just offer you food for thought. Today, we're very pleased to have with us my friend and mentor, Matthew Daniell, who is the founder and guiding teacher of North Shore Insight Meditation Center. He's been practicing Buddhist meditation for over 35 years. He spent over a decade in Asia, where he practiced Zen and has practiced Zen intensively in Japan, Tibetan Buddhism in India, and insight meditation in Burma, India, and Thailand, where he was ordained as a monk. Matthew's Asian teachers include Master Tangen Harada Roshi, as well as insight meditation teachers Dipa Ma and Munindra. He's also learned directly from the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh, and Ajahn Chah. His main Western teaching mentor is Larry Rosenberg, with whom he co-taught for over 15 years. Matthew teaches locally and nationally at various retreat centers, including the Omega Institute, Kripalu, Philadelphia Meditation Center, and Cambridge Insight Meditation Center. Matthew was a co-founder of the Insight Meditation Center of Newburyport, as well as its primary and guiding teacher from 2005 to 2022. In 2022, he founded the North Shore Insight Meditation Center. So welcome, Matthew. It's great to have you with us. We always like to start these discussions by getting a sense of kind of the path that you've been on, going right back to the early days of your childhood, sort of how your spiritual journey has evolved in that time.
Thank you, Ted. And thank you, Joel. It's an honor to be here. And it's great to be able to share with the community. For myself, I guess some of the seeds were just childhood inklings. That there was something more, experiences where I felt a really close connection with nature or music or visions in dreams that made me think there's something much more porous about the universe and much more fluid in terms of the life energy of oneself and the world that kind of sowed the seeds of wanting to explore that more deeply. When most of the ways when you're a kid, you're having fun and everything, but you're not really, your parents aren't, at least my parents weren't saying, hey, follow your inner calling. Look at your relationship to all of life, and is there some underlying energy that you're part of that's sacred and mysterious? So there was that inkling in me, and then when I was actually right at birth, I had a trauma at birth, which was I was in an incubator. I was premature, and I was in an incubator for some days, and I just had visceral memories of like trying to get to my mother, who was through 2 layers of glass, and just being stopped by this cold, by not being able to contact my mother for days, and then finally she was able to see me. But I just know that sense of separation and alienation. And then later in childhood, she left when I was 6. And then my dad and then later my stepmom mostly raised me. And I had a good relationship with her, actually. She got remarried, moved about a half hour away. So we continued our relationship, but my dad and my stepmom mostly raised me. And that shock of being the youngest of 3 boys and having your mother just leave, there was an abandonment in that.
I'll say.
That just felt like a crack in the veil of the safety, as well as right when I was born, of the sense of belonging in the world. And so that kind of contrasts with this underlying feeling that we're part of something much greater. So I think that when I was young, I kind of, when I was in high school and first part of college, I partied a lot. I drank a lot of beer. When I was in high school, I smoked a lot of pot. And I wasn't a mean kid. I didn't act out violently, but I was definitely acting out because there's that pain that I had to work with. And then one day, I was raised in Hanover, New Hampshire. My dad was a professor there, and I was up at the frats. That's where I started partying when I was in high school, because back then you can't now, as a local kid. And I chugged, my nickname in high school was Chug King, because I could open my throat. So I was a big guy, and I was, had a good nature. So I chugged a beer, and I was on a porch at a fraternity at Dartmouth, and I passed out. And I fell off the porch, and I landed like 3 feet down on the ground. And I didn't get hurt, but I must have knocked myself out, and I woke up, and I actually heard myself saying out loud, "I quit." And something, I don't know where it was from, but something at that moment just, I totally changed my life, basically. I quit a fraternity I was at my college at Tufts, where I went in Somerville, Mass. And I got an internship for the Norwegian government, and then took a year where I studied in Spain and had like 9 months to travel in Europe and Northern Africa and stuff.
I'm a little confused. Norwegian, Spain.
Yeah, so I had a year. So I got an internship in Norway, and it was part of a year. It was part of a year where I took off from college. I didn't actually take off because I went to a college in Spain for a semester, but I went there for a summer internship. And that was me saying, I quit the fraternity, and this was me saying, I need to get out of this pattern that I'm in. This partying and this pattern that I'm in, I need to just stop. I quit. So I quit drinking. I quit partying. I did a little bit in Norway, not too much, but I just quit. I needed a new way of being. And it was interesting as well, because that summer I worked for the equivalent of the Export-Import Bank for the Norwegian government. And I realized, I was an economics major in college. And I realized I felt kind of dead in the corporate scene, in that I didn't like it, my soul wasn't filled. So I had about 6 months when I traveled freely, and I ended up meeting people in Madrid, Spain, that had a yoga club, and they were also Vipassana or insight meditation teachers. I ended up living there for a month and a half and finding these kindred souls, these beings that just had this kind of joy in living and this freshness and spontaneity that I craved. I didn't know I craved it, but I really craved it. And then, so I went back for my senior year in college, and I became a yoga teacher that summer. I went to Canada and became a yoga teacher. And then, so something really shifted. And the last year, I finished my major in economics, but I really focused on Eastern religions as well. And then was very close with the head of the religion department. And then he set me up to go to Japan. after I graduated, much to the kind of chagrin of my parents and the lines of orthodox kind of professors, engineers, executive, kind of that track that I was probably thought to be being primed to follow. So I just uprooted that, and I went to Japan, and I really fell in love with Zen. That was actually in college, because the head of the religion department was teaching Eastern religion, but he didn't know anything about it. So he said, "You go find out for yourself." So I went to the Cambridge Zen Center and did these different things, and I kind of, even when I was still in college, I got these seeds sown. I liked the intellectual part, reading it, because it was very bendy for my mind, twisty, and like, oh, okay. But I really liked the practice, and I thought there's something really different here in raw experience. So I went to Japan, and I was there for about a year and a half.
Zen in Japan has a reputation of being pretty austere. I'm wondering what kind of your introduction was, sort of landing in the Zendo or wherever it was over there, whether it came as a surprise to be practicing in a different way, or whether your experience in the Zen Center here kind of...
Oh, this experience in the Zen Center here was very different. It was like 5 a.m. My best friend knocked on my window, and we went down and had rice gruel and meditated for 20 minutes, and I was hungover, and it didn't feel, I was like, that was just an experience of was not a Zen practitioner in this country. And actually, to go back a tiny bit, and then I'll go back into the form in Japan, I was actually introduced to Zen by one of my 2 best friends now, who had lived in Japan and came to Hanover from Japan. And as a sophomore in high school, we were at the fraternities partying, and he introduced me to the concepts of Zen. And there must have been something inside me that resonated deeply, because he told me, he said, "Matt, be one with the ball when you're playing pool." And I remember having a really different experience, like really focusing, hitting the ball. I mean, maybe it was a little bit beer-induced, who knows? But I just remember that my mind opened a little bit, and I realized that there's like a direct intimacy with living that we're not taught. That really, and I was from that moment on, I was just fascinated. But it was more of an intellectual fascination. There was some experience, but it was just kind of innately, I think, as you were talking about the nature of spirituality, that there's a universality to it. It was just a little gateway in to just a very natural human capacity. So when I went to Japan, first I just stayed at a community which the head of the religion department has set me up with outside of Kyoto. And I studied Japanese intensively, and then I started doing Zen practice there. And then I decided at a certain point, once my Japanese was good enough, that I wanted to go find a Zen monastery and dive in. So that's what I did. So I went to different monasteries and then checked them out, did bits of training, and settled on one, and one Zen master in particular. And then it was very austere. Get up at 3:30. It kind of very militaristic in a certain way. You have to sit in half lotus. There's 10, 12 hours of sitting practice a day, and when you're falling asleep, you get hit by a stick, and I had a shaved head, not for different reasons than now. Wore black robes, and just threw myself into it. And so it was very austere, but there was something also, there was something that I really liked about the discipline. I think it went with my feeling of not feeling like I really fit in, or I wasn't really going to be happy just following along with it. It felt a little bit prescribed, even though my parents were very free. My dad was like, you can do anything, you can do whatever you want, as long as you don't turn into a bad person, basically, as long as you don't really screw up. So he never even said a negative word when I went to Japan. My mom was all for it. She said, because she was very spiritual, and she said, you're going to do this for a lot more beings than just yourself. You don't know it. And she gave me a really deep blessing, actually.
Beautiful. Which
was great. And it took a lot of energy, but part of that was a young man's energy, which the Zen is very good for. And the form is very strict. So all you do is just give yourself fully to it. And there's a lot of physical pain. I had surgery on both my knees when I got back in the States. From you have to sit half lotus the whole time, and you know, you move and you get hit with a stick and all that kind of stuff. But I was there with the Zen master that I was with, who you mentioned, Tangen Harada Roshi. Actually, they just finally published a book. He passed away a couple of years ago. It's called Entering the House of the Buddha by Tangen Harada Roshi. And I started reading it. And it reminded me, because he was one of the most spontaneous, he's incredibly disciplined. He lived right in the middle of the Zen monastery, very intensive training. But his spontaneity was off. It was beautiful. How much he enjoyed, how you could just see it in his eyes. He just had this connection with life that was beyond. And he trained me very, very hard. And he used to tell me, he used to look in my eyes and they were just glowing. You know, around some beings, you just feel this presence. He just radiated it. And he would just say, you're not two with whatever it is. Like there's a pole in the Zendo. You're not separate. And then, wahaha. And one time and so I got pretty good at Japanese. And he had a regular translator who was gone for months. So he trained me to translate for him.
Wow.
So
Wow, that's really impressive.
Really?
Yeah, I knew enough. We'd sit up there side by side, and he was kind of well known as one of the last great old school Zen masters. So he had people came through a lot, and there were a lot of foreigners that came through, or a number. And I remember one time I was sitting next to him trying to translating something, and I don't know if it was a bad translation that I said or not of the question they'd asked, but he thought it was so funny. That he just and he's a Zen master, you know, he's sitting, it's very formal and it's like a mountain, sit like a mountain, right? Yeah. And he just started laughing uproariously. It was from here. He didn't lose his in full lotus, right? He didn't lose it, but he had dentures. And they flew out of his mouth and landed right between two of the students on the tatami mat floor. And he just like leaned over and swooped it up, grabbed it, stuck it back in his mouth, and didn't lose a beat. It was like nothing. It was like nothing. It could have been the most natural thing in the world. So that was the spirit. That was the spirit, and that was an amazing contrast to the really hard discipline of the practice, which was sitting and walking, and you know, just one bath every 2 weeks. That was outdoors in a round wooden tub with firewood underneath. You know, and it's the climate is similar to here, where I was, near a couple hours from Kyoto on the Japan seacoast. So so it was intense. And actually, the reason that I left was it actually wasn't a perfect fit in a certain way. I remember I went to Kyoto. We didn't leave the monastery much, but I went to Kyoto. We'd get pizza every 3 months or something, and they had these blood pressure machines. And I checked my blood pressure and it was off the charts.
Wow.
High?
Yeah, it's a pressure cooker. No, the Zen it's a real you get these moments, and I had moments of you have moments where you really feel like you're one with nature.
Yes.
One was when a job I was given was to ring the bell at 3:30 in the morning and chant like one of these giant outdoor bells and chant Kanze on Namo Buppo Soya and Ryoyaku. It's like a whole chant. And then bow down and ring this giant bell that wakes up the monastery and the village that was nearby. And you couldn't and it was cold winters, snow, sleet, and you weren't allowed to, there was no heat in the monastery except for little selected areas, and you couldn't wear socks. So I was out there doing this, and it was sleeting, and I got pretty bad frostbite on a number of my toes. But when it was burning, and the sensations were burning, I felt like I disappeared. And there was no pain. I just was. So there was, and that's just a small example. And I didn't lose my toes, and you know, there's a little residual, but I'm fine. But there were experiences that you push so hard that your ego, my mind, had to give up.
Yeah.
Like going through, that's the gateway of pure will in a certain way. And then also being so, you don't have to think, because everything is preordained. It's bells, you don't have to, you just give yourself fully to every moment. So nature, and sometimes with doing the different meditation exercises, you get so absorbed that you would lose your sense of self.
Yes.
But in that, there's an opening into the intimacy with life. And the founder of one of the schools of Zen Buddhism, Dogen, he just said that awakening is intimacy. In that sense, in the
Yes.
real deep sense of losing your sense of separation. So that was a hard way of entering into it, but it was a very strong training, which I think helped me when I moved into a different form. So I did, after that, I kind of wound myself out after I was like, hey, something's not balanced in this. And actually, my roommate at that point was a senior monk, and he had actually gone a little crazy. And they send people there. They don't send them to psychotherapy. They send them to work in the garden. So he had to do that for half a year. Because you get so bent on enlightenment that sometimes it's pure effort, but sometimes it's off a little bit.
Yes.
So so I got exposed to so I eventually left, and he didn't want me to. He said, "You stay with me 20 years. Then I remember that. He said, you stay with me 20 years, then you'll have something really good to give. You're not fully emptied yet. You've had little glimpses." He'd laugh. He'd say, "You're understanding?" He'd say, "Okay, a little bit." A little bit. He'd just roar. So anyway, so that was the introduction. And then I met a monk who was practicing in the Theravada tradition of insight meditation when I was in Kyoto. And then I went and I left the monastery eventually, the Zen monastery, and went and did a retreat from a Burmese monk, and it was like the opposite. He was telling stories of the Buddha, and it was, it was long sittings, maybe an hour, 45 minutes, then walking, but it was so gentle. And it was just talking about these beautiful ways of opening the heart, and very, very simple. And I thought, wow, this is a great balance for. So then I moved into the insight tradition from there. In India, et cetera, et cetera. But
Now, at one point, you became a monk,
yeah,
and I'm curious about both the process you went through in becoming ordained, and also the process you went through in leaving
right.
that status as a ordained monk.
So I went to India after that, and then I did insight meditation there in Bodh Gaya, which was the kind of the place where the Buddha was enlightened. It's like the Mecca of Buddhism.
Yeah.
And so I was there for 9 months, my first time, and I went to Calcutta, and then I worked. That's where I worked with some of they were the teachers of some of the leading teachers in this country: Joseph Goldstein, Jack Kornfield, Sharon Salzberg. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know about any Western teachers. I had just gone to Asia, and I was a seeker. So I was in Calcutta working with these really wonderful women, Deepama and Manindra. We stayed a few doors down from Manindra in College Square, but I was in Calcutta for 6 months, and it's a little bit of a rough place for food. I got giardia, dysentery, and I had some physical stuff. Got hit by a bus. Not terrible. But and I was like, I can't stay here indefinitely. I'm getting really worn down. And I found a book by Joseph Goldstein, who was just ran across it. Who was the founder of the Insight Meditation Society, which is about an hour and a half, 2 hours west of here. And I read it, and it was like, my God, he's speaking pure wisdom. So this is what I've been, learning different languages, and because I studied the Thai language too when I went there. That was a little later. And so they had a 3-month retreat at the Insight Meditation Society every year. So from Calcutta, I applied. I wrote him a letter and said, "I'm coming back to America. I need some decent food," and I didn't say. So I went back. So I left Calcutta and went to Insight Meditation Society. 2 hours from where I grew up. and I did.
You're talking about Barrie.
Yeah, Barrie, Massachusetts. Yeah, right, in Barrie, Massachusetts. So, which is kind of a flagship for it's probably the most major center in the Western world, right? With
Yes.
the founders, Jack Kornfield, Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg, wonderful. And then there's so many offshoots from there.
Yes.
So I did the 3-month retreat there, and then after that I was talking to Joseph, and I wanted more intensive practice, and then I decided that I wanted to go back to Asia and do more intensive practice in Thailand. And a monk I had met in Japan said, "Hey, you should come back and ordain with my teacher, who was outside of Bangkok." So that's why I went to ordain, and I was a monk for just about a year, and in Thailand for about a year and a half. And so it was very different than the Zen experience, because I remember when I arrived, I was already like, okay, enlightenment or bust. I'm partway there, but I got a lot more to go. Let's get down to it. And they're just like, relax, just like chill out. So I met the teacher Ajahn Kao, and he actually he had me a lot of tutoring to learn Thai very quickly. I didn't know it at the time, but he wanted me to be a translator for him. It happened again. And so I did a few months of intensive silent practice in a little kuti, a little hut in the jungle, which was pretty amazing. And then slowly I got more wrapped into doing more things. We started traveling, and I started translating, and I started giving some talks in Thai. And can I give a side story? It's kind of funny, I think.
Please.
Okay. So it was strange. It was called a Vipassana tour. So a bunch of the leading teachers would go around to different monasteries and give talks, and a lot of lay people would come. So it was this kind of big, it was like a traveling Vipassana. Not a circus, but... So I was with him, and then one time we were at a prison, actually. And I was sitting next to him, and he was giving a talk, and there was about 200 inmates that had shackles on on their ankles, couldn't walk. And it was a dirt floor, and it was rough. It was really a rough crowd. And he's talking, and then he stops and he goes over to me and says, "Okay, now you give a talk." In Thai.
Whoa.
So I started talking, and saying how in some ways I had to be very careful about it, and my Thai wasn't that good. That being incarcerated is an opportunity, not an opportunity, but you're a lot of the things you have to think about in terms of planning, and the mind that's always leaning into the next moment, that can be in abeyance, and you don't choose it. But there may be an opportunity. I've never was in jail, but there may be an opportunity, as long as there's enough safety, to really give yourself to each moment. Right, because that's what a retreat is, and that's what monastic life is in a certain way, unless you have a lot of duties that you're running, but there's similarities. And then I was telling a little bit of my history, and then I used, there's this word ma in Thai, ma, and then there's another word that's ma. They sound the same, right?
Yeah.
No.
Sounds close.
One is a horse and one is my mother. So I'm doing this, and they're all somber, and they're like, okay, foreigner, he's trying to do his best, give a little talk here, And then all of a sudden they just started laughing like crazy. And so I turned to the teacher, I said, what did I do? And they said, well, you just called your mother a horse. So there was some humor mixed into all this serious training.
Yeah.
So that's how I got into it. And then actually the reason I left, and it was a lot of good training. I learned a lot. I made a lot of good friends, just former spiritual seekers. And I also learned a lot about the cultural dimensions in a way I hadn't done in Japan, because the practice was more laid back. Mm-hmm. Where a lot of people ordain because it's part of the life cycle. You become a monk, and then for a certain period of time, and then your parents think you can get a better wife, and it's like and the oldest son will often get ordained even if they don't want to for some time, and so there's a lot of cultural reasons. And I learned, and actually enjoyed learning, about how Buddhism is, in the same way, it's very parallel to other world religions in the way that it serves a function, even in the ordained sangha. And a small percentage of the people there really, really wanted to practice a lot. So that was very interesting. And then the reason I left was because the teacher was putting more pressure on me to start. He wanted to go to Europe, and he wanted me to be his translator, and he wanted it. And I didn't have the same connection with him that I had with the teacher in Japan. Mm-hmm. So at a certain point, I was like, I'm going to keep practicing, or maybe I was just being selfish. I wanted to keep doing intensive practice, and I didn't want all the responsibilities that started to come. So I disrobed, and then I just kept doing intensive retreats. Mm.
When you say intensive retreats, how long are we talking about?
I think the next one after that was a 5-week retreat in Malaysia with one of the one of the powerful lineage holders in a Burmese tradition. So that first one was 5 weeks. They were different lengths. I did retreats at IMS, I've done a couple of years of silent retreats at probably, and they were between 3 months and, I don't know, just shorter than that. That was probably the longest extended period, 6 weeks, a month.
Let's move on to kind of the United States, becoming back in this country and becoming a teacher, and particularly kind of the influence that Larry Rosenberg has had on that process for you, someone who has been my teacher as well, and is very beloved by both of us and many other people.
Yeah. So when I came back to the States, I actually came back because my next oldest brother was getting married. So I was practicing. I was mostly in Asia, and I was coming back and forth a little bit, but I was doing a lot of retreats, and I started doing some teaching already at some of the colleges that I've been involved with. I came back from Asia on one trip for my brother's wedding, and I passed through the Insight Meditation Society in Barrie, and I had a couple weeks. I said, "Hey, can I help out?" So they said, "Yeah," but at the end of the 2 weeks, they said, "We have a 3-month retreat coming up. Can you, could you," and we only have 3 cooks, and it's 100 people, and you do all the ordering and all that. And I was like, "I'm not a cook." They said, "No, we could really, you helped out for a couple weeks, you were good, like, please stay on and be a cook." And I was like, okay. So I did the 3-month retreat as one of the lead, I learned how to be a lead cook. And then after that, I stayed on. And when I left, I was the senior staff member. And I was very involved. I was on the first staff member on the board of directors, and we did a lot of good stuff with housing. I got very involved, and when I was there as a cook, Larry Rosenberg was one of the teachers that came through, and he was very personable. So he would meet the staff, and he would have breakfast in the mornings downstairs, in the staff area. So if you knew about that, you could hang out with him, and we hung out some, and he really liked my cooking because he said because I was very spontaneous, and I used home cooked, like my grandma's casserole recipes and things like that. It was very free back then, and he liked the cooking. He said he was really impressed with how I moved because I had all the Zen training, so it was very spontaneous and very embodied in a certain way. And then we started to get to know each other, and he had been a professor, and my dad was a professor, and all that kind of stuff. And then one day he said, "I'd like to train you, but I'm very serious." He didn't have training programs. He chose individuals, very few. And I asked him what it would take. You'd have to move into Cambridge. So I did. I had a girlfriend at the time, and there's a whole story there in terms of moving in. It worked on a number of levels. So I started training with Larry at Cambridge, and I was a yoga teacher. I'd done that in college, and then I had done a number of other trainings because I feel very strongly about the mind-body, the connection there.
Yes.
And so then we started. At a certain point, I would teach yoga. He had a class in the evenings, and I would teach yoga downstairs in the basement before his class was upstairs.
Now, a role that had formerly been taken by John Kabat-Zinn, that I had, my initial meeting with Larry was when he was teaching at the old Cambridge Baptist Church in Harvard Square, and John would have a yoga class, and then Larry would have a meditation class. And so you sounds like moved into the role that John had.
I'm no John Kabat-Zinn. No, but in a certain way, we had a real, and they have a beautiful friendship. And I would recommend for anybody. And Larry, there's a book. I mean, there's a short movie documentary on Larry called is it Long Journey Home?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, and it's just about 35 minutes, and it really details beautifully because John Kabat-Zinn, who's basically the grandfather of secular mindfulness in this country, in the world actually, in a lot of ways, the Western world.
I was a mindfulness stress reduction teacher.
You were.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So you know it intimately. So
Him
they
too.
were. Yeah. So those two were they were best friends.
Yeah.
and they really supported each other. And Johnny actually turned Larry on too.
Yes.
And it's in the, so if you get a chance to watch, if you get a chance to watch the documentary, it's very, I don't know if you've seen it yet, Joe,
No,
but
no.
it's really wonderful. So you predate me.
He's
in your
sometimes called
relationship.
me his longest term student.
That's
He
wonderful.
said that in public. It's great.
Well, we'll fast forward a little bit, and the reason we're sitting here together now, and we both teach for the North Shore Insight Meditation Center, and we both taught for the Newburyport Insight Meditation Center before that, is because of Larry. So,
Yes.
so when I trained with Larry, we started traveling and teaching together. So then we'd go to Kripalu and Omega, and he's the main teacher, but we'd start to teach yoga and meditation. Anyone who knows Larry knows he loves clean food and green tea and yoga and all those things. So we became more of a team in that way. We started at CIMC, but then we took it on the road a bit. He just invited me. And then at a certain point he started, I'd already been teaching some, but he said, hey, well, why don't you teach the walk? Why don't you do the walking, here? Don't, and then why don't you, okay, no, say some things, Don't call your mother a horse, but say something. And so that in that way we slowly moved, and then we did yoga for quite a while, and then after some years it just became natural that we just taught. We just taught together as co-teachers. So that was the story. And then the reason that I came here was because one of his long-term students, Jacqueline Bennett, had asked him to start a meditation center up here, and he had said no. I got my hands full, just paraphrasing, and but I think Matthew can do it. So it actually took me a year to say yes, because I knew it was a really big responsibility, and I had been somewhat of a free spirit, devoted to practice, but a free spirit. And so when I said yes, then he and I and the owner of the former center, we co-founded the Newburyport Center. And so from that time on, Larry came up and taught. And he was like, can you say gray eminence? I'm not sure if that's the right term, but he was always, and he still is to this day. He's still, I talked to him yesterday. I saw him on his 91st birthday on Saturday. It's a tradition we have. I come in, go into Cambridge, and have lunch together on his birthday. So we're very, very close. And he just really has supported all along me as a teacher. And then the action of the Dharma that goes on here. So I feel really fortunate that we had that. And then Ted, this is for you, Ted was coming to the former center, and he was helping out. He was in charge. He actually took care of the driveway when it wasn't paved. And it's very windy and sharp, and when it rains, it's a pain. It's a mess. So Ted did that, and you'd already taught MBSR, and
yes,
and we got to know each other. And then after some time, a number of years, I knew how I was trained, and I knew what, and I said, oh, Ted should be teaching. And I talked to Larry about it. He said, yeah. So then Ted got brought on, and we've been meeting regularly every month or so for how many years, would you say?
Gee, it must be over 10 years,
Yeah.
maybe 12 or 13 by this point.
Yeah, as colleagues, friends, and I've learned a lot from Ted as well, and his whole relationship with his uncle, right? And
Yes.
Father Thomas Keating, one of the leaders of the spiritual, centering prayer. It's a huge movement, worldwide movement of practice. So that's from a different angle, but we've had very rich conversations over many years, and I feel very grateful to have Ted continuing now, since the former center closed, to be one of the bedrock. We have a core of people that I've been working with over years, just a small core. Ted's right in there, that now uphold, and are the main teachers for the North Shore Insight Center, which is kind of floating center, because we don't have one location, but we teach at IANE in Salisbury, and do some stuff at a local residence in West Newbury, and other locations. We teach at the UU Church now. There's different things going on with Effie, who's one of the teachers. So we've that's a continuation, and for me, that's a continuation of Larry as well. And Larry's devotion to practice in daily life the unification of those was so, and one reason our friendship took off, and it was a natural fit for him to be my main Western mentor, is that he had trained a lot in Zen. And Zen is, the emphasis in the words is very much that daily life and formal practice should never be separated. Chop wood, carry water.
Yes.
Type on the computer, deal with emails, right? Cook dinner, everything, right? So we had that, and his line came through one of his main teachers that I also had the good fortune to work in his lineage of Krishnamurti. Used to go to South India. I'd never met the man, but in South India, I used to go to where his main center was. And even before I met Larry, I was going there year after year.
Wow.
And just getting exposed to that very direct daily life as practice, and then throughout the practice, just this is your awakening is in the moment and how you're relating to it. So it's a very relational practice. And then the support of the formal mindfulness practice of sitting, walking, right, watching the breath, and it being open to nature. Those are all supportive of touching an underlying awareness that helps one to be directly clear and intimate with life as it's being lived. And so the supports of formal practice are just part of that. So that's something that Larry and I, he's to me, he's a fantastic, he's just an incredible exponent of that. And he has such humor and wisdom and just love in his heart. And he's grounded and earthy too. So
Yes.
we're both very fortunate to have. He's both of our primary, he's one of my primary teachers, and it sounds like he's your main.
Absolutely.
One of them.
Yeah, over so many years.
Right.
I wanted to just kind of add on a little bit when you're talking about the bringing the practice into daily life, and that certainly Larry's legacy will. Part of it will be that he started the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center, which was the first urban Vipassana center that was really formed to support people who weren't monks, but who were lay practitioners, and to have a place where that sort of life of bringing meditation into all of life could really be supported. One aspect of that is that you just alluded to it a little bit, was the body. And I think that's worth talking about, because a lot of people think, well, you sit in meditation, maybe just follow the breath, or there could be a sense that it's just almost an intellectual experience, but it isn't. It's a embodied experience, and that the practice of Vipassana is, so much of it is really being present in your body as you're sitting there. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that.
So one of the people, a man named Paul Reps, who was one of the first exponents of Zen in the 60s or 70s, he wrote a book called On Having No Head. So just feel into the possibility right now that our center of perception or gravity isn't in our heads, but it is in our beingness.
Yes.
Right now, so what's that like? Does that includes the body? It includes the fullness of this moment, which is embodied, but not in a way that embodiment is separate from our relationship to the world.
Yes.
So a lot of the foundations of mindfulness, there's what the Buddha called 4 foundations of mindfulness. And the first one is body. And there are ways that you can ground and steady attention in the present moment, in a way we touch some calm, some clarity. So it's interesting. The first one is body.
Yes.
And that includes breath.
Yes.
So it's a very accessible way when we learn to just, and it's not on having no head, but it's relaxing our perceptual center. So it's not just this and
Yes.
thoughts. We're not living through our thoughts, but our thoughts live through our being. Which, and a gateway to that is to bring our experience in a more relaxed, open, embodied way. And so you can train in that. Right? We can train in that, and so we do that. We watch breath. We learn to relax into the body. You learn to feel your feet, And you do it in a connected way too, by opening into all the senses. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, just as vehicles for being present.
Yes.
And all of those function through the body. No eyes, no seeing. No ears, no hearing, right? No body, no feeling the wind, no feeling the ground. So in a way, those are all invitations into the absolute intimacy of life touching us here and now in this body. And then the intelligence is the intelligence that's not a thinking intelligence. And that's the hard part for us.
Yeah.
That's what we really need training in. That's what prayer, that's what formal exercises do. So mindfulness can be done in a way that's stepping aside as an exercise. You get some calm. That's a lot of the secular mindfulness world is in that,
Yes.
right? You get some calm and you bring it in into what you're doing. Wonderful. There's a deeper level where, so you start with the body, but then you can move into seeing how our minds and hearts have this underlying layer of reactivity that happens all the time. There's pleasure, there's discomfort. We like, we don't like. We have strong emotions that pull us out of the immediacy of being aware, of being embodied. So as you move on through the layers of mindfulness, you learn to open into the fullness of our experience. So the body can be a training ground, right? And it is a powerful training ground, and it's a place we come back to. But it's not the end, because there's just life. And that's the real teaching that I think Larry is wonderfully, I would say, embodies.
Yes. Yes.
That there's just life. And one of the core teachings, it's actually an old Chinese wisdom teaching, that there's life meeting, there's life in the form of awareness, presence, meeting life in the form of whatever we meet it in. And in the meeting, when those are together, then that sense of separate thinking mind, that sense of just moving through the lens of thought, that can either be softer, and that's a lot of what happens in practice for people, is they just feel a little, it's not that thinking goes away, people have this idealistic sense, oh, I'm not going to be thinking, I have to get rid of thoughts. The reality actually isn't quite like that, and it's actually more human and more realistic, because it just, our relationship to all the critical mind, all the judging self and other, all the going off in the future, getting caught in the remnants, the waves of past experience, those are all allowed to be there. But they're there in a sense of being more fully present, where there's more space with them. And we're still here while they're going on. And so we don't get caught. We don't get taken out of our sense of being. So there's life in the form of being aware, and which supports being aware of the practices. There's life in the form of our inner, not just everything in the inner world that's coming up, all of our conditioning. And there's life in the form of our relationship with everything. And ultimately, it moves even simpler. There's just life.
Yes. Yes.
Which is a beautiful point for us to start to wrap up.
Great.
And we always end with asking for our guests' advice to our listeners about living a more spiritual life. And I think you just beautifully summed that up. If there's anything you'd like to add for the general public.
Just do it. No, it's right. It's right here. It's accessible.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the biggest shifts is when we realize that it's just an innate, on one level you can call it an innate skill, an innate capacity that all humans have. But I think even deeper, it's in the nature of consciousness. It's in the nature of just waking up in the morning, that there's just, when we recognize that we realize that we're here. And there's so many levels to that here that can bring a quality of resilience and richness in our life, that it's right here for our discovery. So it's not far away. It's even too close. So I think the invitation is to give ourselves to our life, do some practices. Great. But the practices serve whatever tradition we're in, but the practices serve the quality of living here and now. So that's what I would say. And it's easier than we think, but it's more rigorous than we think too. It's kind of both. So I don't know, does that get to where you're pointing at?
Beautiful.
That's beautiful.
Beautiful.
Great.
So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us and your experience. And thank you, listeners and watchers, for being with us today. And we hope you join us again in the month of February.
Thank you, Matthew. It's been a real
Thank you,
pleasure
Ted,
having you
Joel.
here today.
Thank you.